So we're now going to talk about how to implement the gateway microservice in the reactive QuoteServices app case study. And this particular approach uses declarative mechanisms in order to be able to configure the gateway. And notice this particular gateway uses Eureka. And because of that, there's very, very little that you actually have to do. The code, and even the declarative code, is extremely minimal, which is really great. So you can find the gateway implementation here at this link in my GitHub repository. So here we are in the GitHub repository for the EX3 project, and you can see that we've got two pieces of code. We have the gateway application, which is very simple. It's just a Spring Boot application that makes this a microservice. And we go ahead and boot up the application. We don't do anything fancy. This doesn't inherit from the base application stuff because we're not trying to register our stuff with Eureka per se. We're using Eureka in a slightly different way. And here's the gateway controller. As you can see, it's also incredibly Spartan. It's got this method that Eureka can use to ping it to see if it's currently alive. And that's really pretty much all there is to it from a code point of view, from an imperative or reactive writing code perspective. However, there is an application YAML file. And this application YAML file is the one that does all the work to set things up. Now, what's interesting is if you were to go back and compare this version of the gateway versus the version we talked about earlier when we talked about the web MVC incarnation of this QuoteServices case study, you would see that that version didn't use Eureka, and we had to hard code all the information in the YAML file. It was called the application-path YAML file. And what that did was it went ahead and instructed the mechanism, the Spring Cloud Gateway mechanism, where to go to find the various routes with the various paths, with the various predicates and filters and so on. We have none of that now because all the microservices are registering themselves with the Eureka microservice. So all we have to do here is we say, we're listening on port 880. We are the gateway application or the gateway microservice application. And then we go ahead and we set things up so that we can use Eureka properly. And here we see that we say that we have Cloud Gateway Discovery Locator, and we want to enable the integration of the API gateway with the Eureka discovery service or with a discovery service, so it automatically creates routes for the registered microservices. We don't have to write those routes anymore by hand. And then we also tell it to convert the service IDs from the discovery service to lowercase before creating the routes, just to have them in a canonicalized form. Something else that's important here, if you want to use the Spring API gateway, you have to use the reactive application type. It only works with reactive. It won't work with any other form like servlet. Then down here, we're going to register the gateway application with Eureka. So we're going to make it a client, and we're going to disable registration of the gateway with Eureka. And we want to enable fetching of the Eureka registry so the API gateway can discover other microservices that are going to be remembered. And I think this is actually supposed to be false, because we're actually not registering ourselves with Eureka. We're registering ourselves to be a client, but we're not registering the gateway with Eureka. The microservices are registering themselves with Eureka. And that's really all there is to it. So this particular configuration will set things up, and then you can run the example. The microservices, the Zippy and Handy microservices register with Eureka. The gateway registers to say it's going to use Eureka, but it doesn't actually register itself. And then when requests come through, it uses Eureka to find out the routes to send the requests so they go to the right microservice.